play the game of Yahtzee, first, set up the game. If you don't have the actual game of Yahtzee, all that you need to play are 5 dice, which you can borrow from other games you have, if needed. Place the dice in the middle of the playing area. You will also need a score sheet for each player. You can find printable score sheets on the Board Simple website. Each player should also have a pen for marking down the score. You can also have a cup to help you roll the dice, but this is not necessary to play the game. After setting up the game, players are ready to begin playing. The game of Yahtzee is a dice-rolling game that can be played with 1 or more players. It is a game of both strategy and luck. To start, 1 player will be chosen as the start player. They will roll all 5 of the dice at the same time. After rolling, they will decide whether or not to roll again. If they decide not to roll again, they will immediately score points for their roll, and their turn will be over. Scoring will be described further later. The next player would now take all 5 of the dice and roll them. They will now choose which die or dice they would like to keep, and which they would like to re-roll. They can re-roll 1, 2, 3, 4, or all 5 of the dice, and roll those they wish to re-roll at the same time. Let's say this player rolled this on their first roll. They decide to keep their 4, 5, and 6. On their second roll, they will roll only the 2 dice that they decided not to keep. After this player rolls their second roll, they will look at all 5 of the dice again and decide whether to score their roll and forfeit their third roll, or to roll the dice a third and final time. On their third roll, they can decide once again to re-roll 1, 2, 3, 4, or all 5 of the dice. For example, let's say this player now decides they would like to keep their 3 6s and roll their other 2 dice to try for more 6s. After their third roll, they must score their dice. After they score, the next player will take their turn and roll all 5 of the dice. Now that we have the general idea of how to play the game, let's look into the process of scoring the dice a bit further. Each turn, each player will choose one of the scoring categories to score for their roll. They do not have to score the sections in order. They must score exactly 1 section each round, and they may not pass. The first category players can score is number values, 1s through 6s. For example, if this player finished rolling and chose to score 3s, they would count the number of dice they rolled with a value of 3, which in this case is 4 dice, and they would multiply 4 by 3. They would score 12 points for this roll, and write 12 in the score section for their 3s. Let's look at another example. This player rolled these dice. They decide to score a number value. They have already scored their 3s, so they cannot score their 3s again. They decide to score their 2s. They rolled 2 dice with a value of 2, so they will score 4 points for their 2s. It should be noted that a player does not actually have to have any dice of the value rolled to score for that value. For example, let's say this player rolled this. They have already scored for their 2s, and they have already scored their 3s. They also decide not to score for their 4s, because they only have 1 4. This player didn't roll any 1s on this roll. However, they could still score for their 1s, if they chose. They would simply score 0 for that section. This can actually be a strategic move. The 1 section can only score a player up to 5 points, so it is not a huge sacrifice to score 0 in this section. Now that we've looked at the number scoring on the upper section of the score sheet, let's take a look at the lower section of the score sheet. Just as with the upper section, there is no order that these values must be scored. A player may skip around, scoring the upper and the lower values as they choose. The first scoring area of the lower section of the score sheet is the 3 of a kind. A 3 of a kind is just like it sounds, a roll that contains at least 3 dice of the same value. So this roll could be used to score a 3 of a kind. because there are at least 3 5s in the roll. If the player chose to use this roll for their 3 of a kind, they would add all of the values of the dice in their 3 of a kind. Then they would add the values of the other 2 dice to that, for a roll total of 25 points. This would be their score for this roll, if they used it for the 3 of a kind. The 4 of a kind works in the same way as the 3 of a kind does. A player just has to have at least 4 matching dice in their roll to score a 4 of a kind. So this roll could be used to score a 4 of a kind, because there are at least 4 3s in the roll. Just as with the 3 of a kind, the player would score points for each die in their 4 of a kind. They would also add the value of the 5th die, so this player would score 12 points for their 4 value 3 dice, plus 6 for their last die, for a total of 18 points for this roll. The next scoring category is a full house. A full house is a roll that contains 2 dice of 1 value and 3 dice of 1 value. If a player rolls a full house and chooses to score it in the full house section, they will score 25 points. It should be noted that a roll containing 5 dice of a kind could be used to satisfy a full house. However, this roll has a more valuable scoring that will be discussed later. Another scoring section is for a roll containing a small straight. A small straight consists of at least 4 dice in numerical order. The value of the 5th die in the roll does not matter. There are 3 possible small straights a player can roll. The first possible combination would be a 1, 2, a 3, and a 4. A 2, 3, 4, and 5 would be another possibility. The final possible combination for a small straight would be a 3, a 4, a 5, and a 6. If a player chooses to use a roll containing a small straight to score their small straight, they would score 30 points. Another scoring section is for a large straight. A large straight contains all 5 dice that can be placed in numerical order. There are only 2 possible rolls that satisfy the requirements for a large straight. A roll of a 1, a 2, a 3, a 4, and a 5 would be one possible large straight. The other possible large straight is a roll that contains a 2, a 3, a 4, a 5, and a 6. If a player chooses to score a roll that contains a large straight in their large straight section, they will score 40 points. Before talking about the Yahtzee section, let's skip down to the bottom to explain chance. The chance section is basically a free roll. If a player decides to score their roll as a chance, they will simply add the value of all of the dice in the roll and score that amount in the chance section. The final scoring section is for a Yahtzee. A Yahtzee is the highest scoring roll a player can roll. A Yahtzee roll is a roll where all 5 of the dice are of the same value. For example, this roll of all 5s would be able to be used to score a Yahtzee. If a player chose to score their Yahtzee, they would score 50 points. It should be noted that a player cannot score a Yahtzee if they have already scored a 0 for their Yahtzee section. With this in mind, a player should never take a 0 for the Yahtzee section, unless it is their absolute last turn, and they do not get a Yahtzee. Under the Yahtzee section is another scoring section for a Yahtzee bonus. If a player has already scored 50 points for a Yahtzee, and they finish their rolling with another 5 of a kind, they will score that roll and also score a Yahtzee bonus. They can score multiple Yahtzee bonuses during the game, and will score 100 points for each Yahtzee bonus they gain. Let's take a look at how the Yahtzee bonus works. Let's say this player finishes their roll for their turn with these 5 6s. They already scored 50 points for a Yahtzee, so they will make a check mark or a tick in this section for a Yahtzee bonus. During final scoring, each one of their tick marks or check marks in this section will score them 100 points. This roll will also still count as a normal roll. So after marking down their Yahtzee bonus, they will score the roll in any open scoring area they choose, just as they would normally do. they could score any remaining open scoring section. The ones this player could score for points would be their 3 of a kind, their 4 of a kind, their full house, or their chance. This player decides to score for their 4 of a kind. They will add up all of their dice in their roll and put their score on their score sheet. As mentioned, a player can score multiple Yahtzee bonuses. So if this player rolled another Yahtzee, they would make another mark on their score sheet in the Yahtzee bonus section. This would score them another 100 points at the end of the game. After getting their bonus, they would then score the roll. This player only has these 3 scoring spaces left. They would not be able to score any points for this roll, so this player would have to take a 0 in one of their scoring sections. This player decides to score their 1s with a 0. One important thing to keep in mind is that a player must have scored 50 points in the Yahtzee space of their scoring sheet before they can take a Yahtzee bonus. So if this player rolled a Yahtzee on their first turn, but decided to count it for their 6s instead of scoring it as a Yahtzee, and then they rolled a second Yahtzee during the game, they would not score a Yahtzee bonus, because they do not yet have a score of 50 points under their Yahtzee section. This player forfeited their Yahtzee by scoring that roll in a different section. This player could now score this roll as their Yahtzee if they chose, and score 50 points. They would now have to roll another Yahtzee on a different turn to get the Yahtzee bonus, now that they have scored a 50 in their Yahtzee section. This is why a player should not score their first 5 of a kind roll in any other section than their Yahtzee section. The game will continue with players taking turns rolling all 5 dice, re-rolling their chosen dice up to 2 times if they choose, and then scoring their roll in one of the remaining scoring categories. Because each player must score on each turn, each player in the game will get the same number of turns. After all players have filled in all 6 of their scores in the upper section, and all of the 7 required scores in the lower section of the game will be over. All players will now complete their final scoring. First, each player will score their upper section of their score sheet. To do this, each player will simply add up their points for 1s through 6s. They will write their total in the upper total box. After establishing their upper total, they will see if they have enough points to score the bonus. If their upper section total score was 63 or higher, they will score 35 points. If it wasn't, they would score 0 points in this section. This player had 64 points, so they will get the bonus and score the extra 35 points. This value of 63 for the bonus is based on the player scoring at least 3 dice of each value in this section, so a player can keep track of how they are doing towards reaching that bonus as they play. Each player will add their upper total to their bonus to get their upper grand total. Different score sheets may call these values slightly different things, but the concept is the same. After scoring their upper section, each player will score their lower section. To do this, they will add the values for their 3 of a kind, 4 of a kind, full house, small straight, large straight, Yahtzee, and chance. They will also score 100 points for each mark they made in the Yahtzee bonus section. This player had 1 Yahtzee bonus, so would score 100 points for that section. They will total up all of their scores for this section and write it in their lower grand total section. Next, they will take their upper grand total from the section above and write it in the upper grand total box below. Their game total will be the total of their lower grand total and their upper grand total. The player who ends the game with the highest score will be the winner. If the game ends in a tie, the tied players can either share the win or decide on a way to roll the dice to break the tie. Players can now start a new game by filling in the next column of the score sheet.